Today I decided to give you guys a ranking of the Spider-Man films. This is a series of films that started in 2002 when I was a kid, and they're still ongoing to this day. I'm only going to include 10 films on this ranking. I'm going to ignore the MCU crossover movies such as Avengers and Captain America Civil War, and I'm only going to focus on the ones that prominently feature Spider-Man, not just him as a side character. We have 10 movies to go through, so without further ado, let's get started with number 10, The Amazing Spider-Man 2. What can I say about this film except that it's basically just a mess? It once again stars Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man and Emma Stone as Gwen Stacy, and this time we have three different villains consisting of Electro, the Green Goblin briefly at the very end, and the Rhino also super briefly at the very end. The most prominent villain in the film, though, is Electro, played by Jamie Foxx, and his performance is just so goofy. It's basically the Jim Carrey Riddler that you saw in Batman Forever. The biggest problem with this one is that it's tonally just a mess. You have scenes that are super goofy, like the scenes with Max, then scenes that are supposed to be super heartfelt, like about Peter's parents when he was younger, and even a spoiler alert death scene of Gwen Stacy, which is actually kind of hard hitting and sad, but it's immediately preceded by a really goofy and god awful performance and the worst Green Goblin the series has seen. I mean, this guy looks like a troll doll inside of a mech suit. Just a mess of a film all around, and absolutely the worst of the Spider Man films. Up next is The Amazing Spider Man 1. The worst thing about this film was that it's just redundant. Take the essential same story as the first Spider Man film from Sam Raimi, remove all the funny wittiness that is associated with Spider Man, make it overly dark and gritty, and you have a movie that is just kind of dull. I do think Andrew Garfield is a damn good Spider Man and Peter Parker, but I think his movies are rather lackluster. This one is okay and it is watchable, and I think the Lizard is kind of a fun villain, although I hate the fact that he doesn't wear his traditional lab coat apart from a couple of seconds in the movie. But it's watchable. Nothing special about this film, but it's inoffensive, just completely unoriginal. Up next, we have Spider Man Into the Spider Verse. I do wish that this one ranked higher, and I do like a lot of things about this one. But I think my biggest problem with this one is that it's just another origin story. Yes, it's not the exact same story as Peter Parker's origin, but it is similar in a lot of ways. And while I do like the ensemble cast, I feel like they don't really get enough screen time here. And Miles is an interesting character, but he doesn't really become Spider Man until the last 20 minutes of the movie, just fumbling around most of the film. I can acknowledge that's a well made film, but I also think the animation's kind of janky. I know that's by design. I think the actual visuals are appealing, but the backgrounds are a bit blurry, and the high jankiness of the movement I was never really a big fan of. It's not as noticeable in the sequel, but I just don't really love that animation style. You also see it in the new Ninja Turtles film, and I've just never really been a big fan of it. That doesn't mean this is a bad movie, just one that I think is kind of hard to get into and has kind of low replay value. Up next, we have Spider Man Far From Home. The biggest problem with this movie is that you take Spider Man and put him out of the city. I get they were trying to do something new, but I want to see Spider Man in New York, and Europe is just not as interesting of a setting for the hero. I also feel that Jake Gyllenhaal is very miscast as Mysterio, who's supposed to be like this super nerd, but you essentially get a buff, chiseled actor to play Quentin Beck. I just don't think it really works. On top of that, the story with the elementals, who just turn out to be holograms, is just kind of underwhelming. And I think his powers being completely tied to drones makes Mysterio kind of a boring character. There's also a lot of lovey-dovey stuff with him and MJ trying to get together, Ned and Betty trying to get together, and I don't know. I just felt this one was kind of a misfire. Whereas the first film was pretty much firing on all cylinders, the sequel just feels kind of lackluster and very underwhelming. And definitely my least favorite of the Home trilogy. Up next, we have Spider Man Across the Spider Verse. While the first film, I think, had kind of a lackluster story and a so-so villain with Kingpin, this one I feel is an improvement. I think it's great that we actually get to see Miles come into his own as Spider-Man. I think him and Gwen's relationship is actually pretty cute. I think his parents are much better handled here, and I like their dynamic. It's a lot funnier movie than the first film, I feel. I really enjoy Peter B. Parker as well as little baby Spider Girl that he has, who looks just like Mary Jane. The movie's very silly, but it does have a lot of stuff in it that I like. It's definitely a more kid-friendly movie than some of the Spider-Man films, but it does get pretty dark at times, and I think Miguel O'Hara is really great as the Spider-Man 2099 character. I do think there are some things about the film that are a bit convoluted, though. Like the different Spider-Man feel way less organic this time than Into the Spider-Verse. There's like a Indian Spider-Man who I thought just was kind of overly silly. There's a punk rock Spider-Man who I did also like, but then you actually see where all the other Spider-Man are housed in Miguel O'Hara's Spider Base, essentially, and I found most of them to be just kind of silly and very throwaway cameos. Funnily enough, there is some live action cameos here too, which I thought were interesting, such as a live action Prowler. And all in all, this is a big improvement over the first film. I just kind of wish it was a little bit more conclusive with its ending. The film does end on a cliffhanger, but I also found it to be a little underwhelming. There's no final battle or any grand ending here. It just kind of ends on a, oh, it's over note, and that kind of bothered me some, but still an enjoyable little film. Up next, we have Spider Man 3. Now, I will admit, on a pure technical level, the Spider Verse movies are better than this, but I do have a soft spot in this film, and I am very nostalgic for it. And also, I just really like how they handled some of the characters in this film. Sandman, I think, is magnificently played by Thomas Hayden Church. I actually do like James Franco as the New Goblin. And while I'm not a huge fan of Topher Grace as Venom, I think they got his story right, and the character does look cool. This is definitely the weak point of the Raimi trilogy, and it's definitely overly goofy, especially with like the dance sequences. But it's an entertaining film, and that's really all I can really say about it. Some very weak elements, such as an amnesia storyline and just way too many scenes of goofiness, but an enjoyable film and one that is kind of a guilty pleasure of mine. Up next, we have Spider Man Homecoming. The essential relaunch of Spider Man to the MCU. This shows Peter Parker as a sophomore in high school, falling for this girl named Liz, and having to face the Vulture, magnificently played by Michael Keaton. This one's very entertaining, and I think that it's a great relaunch of the character. It did everything the Amazing Spider Man should have, by giving us a proper high school age Peter Parker. My personal favorite Peter Parker is like the college age Peter Parker, but I don't mind the high school age one, and this is the best of the high school age Peter Parkers. Toby really played more like the college Peter, and Andrew played a bit of both. But if you want high school Peter Parker, this is the film for you. Fun, whimsical, and a magnificent villain in the Vulture. But the only real problem that I have with the movie is that it half-assed some of the side villains. For instance, the Shocker literally is half-assed in this movie. What I mean by that is he has one shot glove and doesn't wear the mask. There's also two of them, and neither one of them suit up throughout the entire movie, and the one surviving one, Herman Schultz, is defeated by Ned. I really love the Shocker, and he's a great low-level kind of villain for Spider-Man. And he could have been a great entry-level villain for him to face along with Vulture, but he's just a joke in this movie. Apart from that, though, and the mishandling of Scorpion, I really do love this film, and I think it's a really great introduction of Spider-Man into the MCU. Up next is Spider-Man No Way Home. This film was a great combination of not all the original Spider-Mans, it's also a redemption of Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, a return of Tom Maguire as Spider-Man, and a conclusion of Tom Holland's Spider-Man. That's a lot to juggle in one movie, but the film does it magnificently. There are a few plot conveniences and plot contrivances, such as certain characters shouldn't even be in the movie, such as Electro, who never even learned Spider-Man's identity, to the best of my knowledge. But apart from a few plot gripes, it's just so entertaining and so enjoyable that I have to put it this high. I think that the action is magnificent. I think it's great seeing Toby again. Willem Dafoe is really awesome once again as a Goblin. And I love how they combined his old school armor with the purple robes that he wears over them to create a classic Goblin look without completely redesigning the original. The film is heartfelt at times, it's action-packed at times, it's entertaining at times, and it's a bit out there at times, but it's a very enjoyable film and my favorite of the Spider-Man MCU movies. Coming in at number 2 is the best film on this list, but not my personal favorite, and that would have to be Spider-Man 2. Released in 2004, Sam Raimi's sequel to the original Spider-Man upped the ante. You have a villain that's very sympathetic in Doc Ock. You have Peter trying to not only juggle college life, a job, but also a romance life with Mary Jane, who's interested in someone else. It's Spider-Man at his absolute best. It's college-age Spider-Man, which is my favorite. It's a Spider-Man who's trying to balance not only his life, but also his superhero job. And all the stress leads to him even losing his powers at one point. He must rise up and defeat Doc Ock and save the city and find himself again in this amazing sequel. Sam Raimi really brought his A game here, and while it's not my personal favorite, I do feel it's the technical best of all the Spider Man movies. A magnificent sequel and one that I absolutely love. But you just can't beat the original 2002's Spider Man. I do think that this film has some problems, and I'll even name some of them here. I think the scenes where Peter is talking to MJ are usually pretty hokey. The one in the hospital is kind of embarrassing, where he's saying how you've reached the unreachable when you talk to MJ. It's like she's just a person, dude. It's okay. And then at the end, when she's confessing her love for him, I always found that scene so sappy and so silly. But apart from the romance scenes being overly corny, I do love this movie. I think the action is really hard hitting. It's the most brutal of all the Spider Man movies, especially the fight at end between Spider Man and Goblin. The special effects, for the most part, still hold up very well. I love the look of New York in this movie. It's like Sam Raimi went for a very stylized look that wasn't really recaptured in the sequels. It's everything has like a certain sheen to it. It's like you're watching a comic book mixed with live action, and it's blended perfectly. It's not like you're watching Sin City or anything, but it definitely has a very almost late 90s, early 2000s look that you don't really see in movies anymore. The film is magnificent from start to finish. Willem Dafoe is one of my, if not my favorite villain. I love him as the Green Goblin, and I think that he really steals the show here. Tobey Maguire, I think, is the perfect Spider-Man. Not only is he overly nerdy, but he can also be kind of soft and gentle and kind-hearted, much like Peter Parker is. His Spider-Man is my favorite portrayal that he does of the character. It's a great origin story for not only Spider-Man but Green Goblin as well. It has magnificent romance, even though it can be a bit cheesy at times. It has great action through and through that still holds up even to this day. And even though this film is pushing 20, 30 years old, it's still one of the best made superhero films ever. This is my personal favorite superhero movie, and I don't think it will ever be topped, and I absolutely love it from beginning to end. The original Spider Man is just amazing, and I recommend it to anyone who loves superhero films, good action, or just a good time. Well, that's my list. Sorry if I didn't go as in depth as other lists, but there were a lot of entries here, so we had to get through them as quick as we could. If you'd like, leave your list down below, or just tell me your favorite Spider Man film. I'm hoping that when Sony does bring back their version of Spider Man 4, it's actually good. And although Toby is pushing 50, I would like to see him play the character at least one more time. I thank you all for watching, and peace out.